embrace his teammates in celebration. There are so many great stories I remember of Karl, and most of all, I remember the intelligent, charismatic young man that had an infectious smile that I will always cherish in my memories.
I feel like at Karl's birth, there I was, chain smoking in the waiting room, waiting and waiting and waiting. Of course, he always had his own timetable. Finally, they said, you know, come on in. I went in and then waited some more. Then the doctors finally concluded they were going to have to induce birth, so they said, send the father out. So out in the waiting room I was again, smoking. And finally, as soon as I lit up that cigarette, they said, call the dad in again, she's giving birth. And there he was. We had Karl very early in our marriage, but not too long after my father had passed away. He was so wanted, so anticipated, and so cherished. I remember when he was learning to walk. He wouldn't walk. He'd run. He'd run and fall down, run and fall down, continuously. And the last time he'd fall down, he'd be asleep. Anything that interested Karl, he'd be involved in to the nth degree. As a child, he played at top speed, no matter how clean he was. When we let him outside, in 5 minutes, he could be a total dirtball. I used to call him Pigpen. There was a swing set outside our apartment. He'd love to be pushed higher and higher, screaming at the top of his lungs, more, more, until I finally pushed him so high, pretty much vertical to the ground, he'd start shrieking and laughing and crying, and I wasn't quite sure if he was really laughing or crying, or if he was really enjoying it or not. Soon after we moved into the house that we live in now, I had to call the oil man because our ancient furnace had conked out. After looking at the furnace and checking it out, everything seemed okay. But on opening a check valve, it was determined that we had water in our oil. I indignantly said, well, you're the guys that deliver our oil. Come on. They said, well, maybe we should go outside and see if your thing's open or something. Maybe some rain got in. Maybe the cap's off. So we walked outside, and sure enough, there was a garden hose stuck down. When Maximus came along, we went sleigh riding. Just the three of us, because Lisa was pregnant with Sage at the time. It was the hill down at the quarter where Dark Hollow turned sharply. But being the older 11-year-old brother now, he decided that hill was not big enough anymore. So we all decided to go down to New Hope where the big hill was. When we arrived, we realized no one was sledding, and we couldn't figure out why. It was really cold and windy, but hey, plenty of snow. So Karl and Maximus trekked to the top of a very steep hill with the two sleds we had. Karl came down first, reached the bottom, and exclaimed, "Wow, that was one sheet of ice. I was totally out of control. Cool." Suddenly we remembered 5-year-old Maximus was going to follow him and started screaming at the top of our lungs. "Walk down, come back," and waving our arms. Evidently our screaming voices were carried away by the wind, and the waving was interpreted as encouragement. Maximus came down the hill, mostly on his face. As we ran to where he ended up and we saw him move, we were relieved. But then he stood up. Karl turned to me and said in a totally deadpan voice, "Mom is gonna kill you." And then shrugged as if to say, better you than me. He was extremely proud of both his brothers, though, and why not? He truly believed he was their third parent, and like any parent, he was proudest of the things they could do that he could not. Sage was the apple of Karl's eye. He was proud of how well Sage could run the 800, which he considered long distance. Actually, Karl considered the 400 long distance. I found out recently from one of the coaches that when he was asked to run the 400 to help the team, he would always give the coaches a thumbs up. Evidently, the rest of the team knew that was code for another finger on his hand. He was really proud of the way Max could communicate, both on speech and on paper. If truth be told, he was a little intimidated by Maximus. He never let on to Maximus that this was the case, though. When Max turned in a superb performance in Les Mis as the conniving, underhanded innkeeper, Karl's comment was, "But was he really acting?" Of course, the only people Karl would tease constantly were the ones he loved the most and admired enough to provide a worthy challenge. I have no idea where he got that from. Throughout his entire life, Karl would communicate most with his mother, on the phone, by email or text, or when he was around. She was always there to give him encouragement, support, and advice. Sometimes she had to tell him things he really didn't want to hear. And even when there would be occasions when he would vehemently disagree with her, there was never a time he didn't know how much she loved him more than anything. And when he was around, her embrace would melt the weight of the world from his face. Of course, she was also the one who dragged him along on our spiritual adventure vacations. Indeed, all our sons have been accorded this honor. To hear Karl tell it, though, it could all be summed up with having to follow a very large, naked lady out of a sweat lodge on her hands and knees, which of course scarred him for life. I am very fortunate and blessed to have shared Karl's path for 30 years. I asked a lot from my firstborn, and I got a lot. Only it wasn't always the way I expected. That was the magic of living with Karl. I love you, Karl.
Hi, everybody. We moved from the area about 15 years ago, Lane McNish. Some of you know me, some of you don't. But we were neighbors with Karl and Lisa for 15 years. We bought our houses just about the same time. We're like this, thick as thieves from the time they met each other as toddlers. And I have to tell you, Jamie was the second oil man on that adventure. But Karl and Lisa were nice enough not to say, hey, pay half the bill, so we gave him a case of beer, and it seemed to be okay after that. They got into so much mischief together, oh my God, it was unbelievable. I'll tell you just two stories. One's mischief, one's just cute. When they were young, maybe 7, 8, 9, I'm not sure the age, the movie E.T. was popular. One by one, we started noticing electronics disappearing from both houses. Jamie, where's your, she remembers, where's your little play school record player? Well, I don't know, Mom. Karl, where's the radio? No, nobody knew anything. They were like, one by one, we started realizing there were 10 to 15 little kid electronics missing. We finally, one day, went behind Lisa's barn, and there they were all tied up in the tree, dismembered, all the parts. We're like, what are you guys doing? We're calling E.T. So how can you get too mad? But it was hundreds of dollars worth of toys up there, just totally, torn apart. Another time, my cousin was coming over to our house at Christmas, which she always did, bringing presents. Carl was 3, Jamie was 4, and she comes in with an armload of presents and hands one to Jamie. And, thanks, Aunt Kate. And Carl looks up and he says, "But where's mine?" And Kate says, "I don't know you." Carl looks up and he says, "But I'm Carl." That's it.
I have the privilege to be with individuals during some of their last moments in hospice, and one day when I was working with a 21-year-old who was passing, I was gifted just randomly from a book I have with quotes from the Dalai Lama, and this quote seemed very fitting. This is for Karl. "Some people, sweet and attractive and strong and healthy, happen to die young. They're masters in disguise, teaching us about impermanence." His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Carl's here. So, growing up, I didn't really get the chance of having like a sort of normal, traditional brotherly relationship with Karl, as the earliest memories I have are of him coming home and smelling like garbage of soccer with his. It was terrible. It was the raunchiest smell you could think of. Anyway, I just remember I'm looking up to him and thinking he was the neatest thing since peanut butter, and how he could make he made everybody laugh all the time, and he was a really good teacher, and I wish I'd talked with him a lot more. I mean, I did talk with him as much as a brother could, but there's one memory in particular that I always find fascinating, and as most of you know that I'm very interested in meteorology, and I love to watch thunderstorms. And there was one day where Karl was sitting out on the porch, and I knew it was a hot, humid day and the thunderstorms would come, and I told him to tell me when the thunderstorm was here so I could watch it with him. And I went inside, and I fell asleep, and lo and behold, I woke up and I saw storm clouds to the west, and a thunderstorm had just passed. And I went outside to Karl, and I said, "Karl, I told you to tell me when a thunderstorm came." And he looked at me, took a big huff of his cigarette, and said, "Another one's coming." And I said, "Oh, yeah, whatever, that doesn't happen. Thunderstorms don't happen like that." And lo and behold, the biggest thunderstorm I've ever experienced in my entire life. Karl and I were there to witness the most rare form of lightning. It's called ball lightning, where it comes out of the ground and it looks like a rising sun. And the sheer terror I saw in his face as it struck about 20 yards away, I will never forget. And I'm just really blessed and thankful to have had a brother like that, and also to have Maximus and my parents and all of everyone here and everyone who couldn't be here. Thank you.
We're trying not to drag this out forever for these poor people. That'll teach them. Hopefully that'll be the last funeral they'll come to for a while.
Thanks, Grandma. When I am alone and it is quiet, I am overwhelmed by the loss of my brother. I've been avoiding thinking about eulogizing him, so I hope you'll bear with me. I'll try and get out something. It's just too important, and it just seems so soon that I've been resisting it. And also the rest of my family has given me a pretty hard act to follow. But Karl set the bar so high for me. And I mean, growing up, everybody knew Karl. For better or worse, I was Karl's brother. And, you know, that would elicit different reactions from people, like, what are you thinking? How is this going to go? But a lot of good memories too. And I did have the opportunity to play with him growing up, even though we're 7 years apart, and